as well as an explanation of the methods used to identify overburdened communities. As such, I'm very pleased to introduce our Deputy Commissioner, Olivia Glenn, and Sean Moriarty, our Chief Advisor for Regulatory Affairs, who will offer welcoming remarks and provide the background on environmental justice. Olivia?
Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who I have not had the pleasure to meet, my name is Olivia Glenn, and I am the Deputy Commissioner for Environmental Justice and Equity here at the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Today's webinar will be specifically focused on the requirement within the environmental justice law to notify municipalities with block groups that meet the criteria of having overburdened communities within their borders. This information was initially provided online on our Office of Environmental Justice website on January 19th. We wanted to give each of you a few weeks to have access to this information before convening today's webinar, where we will walk through the resources and tools and answer any questions you may have. Please do be aware that by participating in today's webinar, you consent to being recorded. There should have been a banner that comes up across the top of your login that shows you that the recording is underway, and that by being here, you consent to being a part of this official record. So this recording will be an ongoing point of reference for each of you on this call, as well as for our entire community of interested stakeholders. So we did make the effort today to make sure that the audience that's here is largely municipalities and entities that support municipalities, so that the questions that come up are relevant to each and every one of you who are on the call. But as you can imagine, we've received a lot of inquiries about this, so we're going to share this out so that all stakeholders who have an interest can have access to this information. I just wanted to note as well, the really good thing about having the recording is that you can revisit it and share it with any of your staff and submit any additional questions you have as a point of follow-up. And so it's pretty easy to reach us. I know you all know how to reach Carrie because she is just so awesome and so available. You can certainly reach her, but please do also know that we have an email address dedicated to this effort, and it is ejrulemaking@dep.nj.gov. And I'd like to ask one of our DEP staff people if you can just drop that email address into the chat function for everyone to see. Just in terms of framing a little bit about where we are with our overall process, I just want to share with you that we had our first stakeholder meeting surrounding the environmental justice law back in October. And at that point in time, we gave an overview of the law in its totality, as well as the steps we were looking to take in this rulemaking process. Since that time, we have since launched topical meetings. That first meeting that was topic focused was held on January 20th, where we focused on geographic points of comparison and permit and facility definitions. So for those past sessions, that first session in October where we did the full overview, and the January 20th session where it had the topic points of focus, you can find all of them online at our Office of Environmental Justice website. And the URL for that website is nj.gov/DEP/EJ. Again, that's nj.gov/DEP/EJ. And again, if we can just drop that website URL into the chat for everyone's quick reference, that would be great. So looking ahead, we're going to host our next topical meeting in a couple weeks. The topic for that meeting will be environmental and public health stressors, which is a subcomponent of the law that we really want to tease out to make sure it's really refined in the rulemaking process. That meeting will be held on February 18th, and we'll make sure that Carrie sends out information about that, but also if you contact us on our email list, we'll make sure that we keep you informed. So we would like to request that for any questions you have during the course of this presentation, at least verbal questions, that you hold them until the end. We will dedicate time for Q&A. But in the meantime, if you want to type questions into the chat function, that's the call out box that looks like the cartoon. Certainly feel free to put the questions there and we will see them. And for those items where we have immediate answers, we will provide them today. And if we don't have immediate responses available, consider that a documented record and we will certainly follow up with you. So with that, at this point in time, I am delighted to pass the floor to my colleague, Sean Moriarty, who is our department's Chief Advisor for Regulatory Affairs. Sean, it's all yours.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Glenn, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I think, judging by the number of folks who are in our virtual room today, this is obviously a topic of great interest among our municipal partners. So rather than kind of dump you directly into a very scientific conversation about census data and other things that without context won't make much sense, I figured we'd kind of go through initially a quick run through the basics of the Environmental Justice Bill, so you have a little bit of background as to what we're talking about when we get into some of the other issues. So I'm going to ask my colleague Steve to pull up the PowerPoint so I can show you what I'm talking about, and not just try to talk at you.
So are you seeing that, Sean?
I am.
I will make it this whole slideshow there. So that's just the beginning.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve.
Yep.
Okay, so in September, the New Jersey legislature passed a landmark environmental justice law. It's the first of its kind in the nation's most empowering environmental justice legislation. The EJ bill recognizes that because environmental standards are often formulated based on the effect pollution has on general populations spread over wide geographic areas, existing environmental laws may fail to fully consider the impacts that certain pollution-generating facilities have on their local communities, and that this failure has created pockets of high pollution across New Jersey, where many pollution-generating facilities have become concentrated in predominantly minority and low-income communities that may lack the financial and political power to shape their local landscape and avoid disproportionate adverse impacts upon their public health and environment. So now that we understand the premise of the bill, let's talk about exactly what it does. And to do that, I think we first need to understand where and how it applies. And I look at this as a three-pronged test of applicability. The first question we have to ask ourselves is the facility in question, the one seeking a permit from the department, one of the 8 types of facilities listed in the bill? And that's what you see on the screen in front of you. Those include major sources of air pollution, such as power plants or cogeneration facilities, incinerators or resource recovery facilities, large sewage treatment plants, transfer stations or solid waste facilities, certain large recycling facilities, scrap metal facilities, landfills, and medical waste incinerators. The second question we ask ourselves is whether that facility is seeking one of the subset of environmental permits. And those include solid waste, recycling, water supply and water pollution, air pollution, pesticides, and our land use or development permits, including things like wetlands, CAFRA, and flood hazard. And then the third question we ask ourselves, and this is the one that we're going to be speaking primarily about today, is whether that facility is seeking a permit whether the facility seeking the permit is located or proposed to be located in an overburdened community. And we'll talk a lot more about how that definition comes into play as we get further on in today's conversation. And it's if and only if these 3 criteria are met that the project is subject to the requirements of the law. Now, while Steve is going to get into this in significantly more detail in terms of how exactly these overburdened communities are plotted, I'll just give you a very brief overview of what the bill says. So while it leaves to the department to better define those facilities and permits that we talked about, and that's part of what we've been doing during our stakeholdering thus far, it does provide us with a specific definition of what constitutes an overburdened community. And that's defined as one of 3 things. It's defined as a census block where 35% of the households qualify as low income, and that's defined as at or below twice the poverty threshold as determined by the Census Bureau. Or 40% of the households in that census block are classified as minority, being residents that identify as minority or members of a state-recognized tribal community. And third, whether 40% of those households have limited English proficiency. And that's defined as lacking an adult that speaks English, quote unquote, very well, according to the United States Census Bureau. And a couple of key points here. First is the use of the word or. That really gives the most expansive protections possible. I think it's also important to note the use of the census block groups, which are really the most finite unit of neighborhood census data available. So taken together, the combination of the broader category of individuals with the more focused consideration of the census block group really does, in our opinion, best define the individuals most in need of those added protections of local public and environmental health. So as I said, as we continue, you're going to hear more about that analysis and more about the data used to provide the notice of these block groups. Go to the next slide, Steve, thanks. So where the EJ law applies, where you meet those three criteria that we talked about earlier, it requires an analysis of the existing and new contributions to public health and environmental stressors in that community. And it just runs through here some of the enumerated examples of those that are contained in the bill. So environmental stressors are defined to include things such as concentrated areas or mobile sources of air pollution, contaminated sites, transfer stations, recycling facilities, scrapyards, and other solid waste facilities, and point sources of water pollution, including combined sewer overflows. We also need to consider and analyze public health stressors, which are defined as those conditions that may cause potential public health impacts in an overburdened community. And those potential impacts include asthma, cancer, elevated blood lead levels, cardiovascular disease, and developmental problems. Now, once we've analyzed those stressors, the question becomes, what do we compare them to determine whether a disproportionate impact exists? And the bill requires the department, Steve, you can go to the next one, requires the department to determine whether the stressors are disproportionate to those borne by other communities within the state, county, or other geographic unit of analysis as determined by the department. So as you kind of think through how this bill applies, the department will be looking at all of those stressors if a facility triggers the requirements of the environmental justice law and making the appropriate comparison to the neighbors, essentially, of that census block group to determine whether the individuals in that census block group are facing stressors that are higher than those borne by those other communities. Next slide. So I think the last thing the folks would probably be asking themselves of this kind of high level overview is, what is this going to look like? And we've kind of sketched out a very preliminary outline of what a process could look like for facilities seeking a permit that's subject to the environmental justice law. So along with the permit application to the department, the facility and infected block group would complete an environmental justice impact statement that identifies the existing public health and environmental stressors in that community. Subject to the criteria that we're developing with the input of our stakeholders, the department would then assess whether the pollution from that facility would create a disproportionate impact on the local community by imposing additional stressors. We would then assess whether, through additional appropriate pollution controls that address those localized impact, the facility can avoid imposing a disproportionate public health or environmental impact. Where there is no disproportionate impact or where the pollution controls would resolve such an impact, the department would issue the requested permit. Alternatively, if a disproportionate impact exists, but the project would serve a compelling public interest, then the permit can also be issued. However, if a disproportion exists and there is no compelling public interest, for new facilities, the permit would be denied. If we're dealing with renewal or expansion of existing facilities, the bill only empowers the department to impose additional conditions for the protection of public health. So that's really just a very high level and brief overview. I wanted to leave as much time as possible for Steve to go through his piece and for us to really spend time answering questions that folks are inevitably going to have on this. And as Olivia said, we're in the midst of our stakeholdering and certainly encourage anyone who has questions to reach out for us. We are happy to reconvene a group similar to this as we move forward, to update you on stakeholdering as we go forward, to provide additional information as we continue to develop the concepts that we will ultimately seek to implement through the environmental justice regulations. So with that, I'm going to hand the stage off to Steve Anderson. He is our one of our data experts at the department and really the driving engine, along with Sherry Driver, of this effort for the department to put together the data that we need to be successful in implementing these regulations. And Steve is going to give an overview of exactly how we were able to determine where those census block groups lie within the individual municipalities. So Steve, it is all yours.
Thanks, Sean. Sean, can you hear me well enough? Just want to make sure.
Yes, sir.
Great. Okay, so what I'm going to do, as Sean said, is kind of give you an overview of some data products that we've put together on overburdened communities. We basically put together 4 different places where you can kind of get the data, and I'm going to be talking about them. So right now I'm shifting to a live website on where you can find that information. It's at the web address up here, nj.gov, DEP, EJ, communities. So I'm just going to do a real quick walkthrough of this website, the information that's available, and kind of 4 places where you can get that information. Real quick, the website starts off with a similar map to what Sean presented at the state level to give you an idea what's where the overburdened communities are. And it also provides a color coding based on which one of the 3 criteria are met at the different block group levels. Before going into those 4 places where you can get the data, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the details, so about the methods, and you can also find this here down in the technical notes section down here. So I'll just be pulling from that. So this is basically the background on how we use the census data to answer the 3 criteria questions. And I'll just highlight a couple of things first. Go down to the table down at the bottom. These are the 3 criteria outlined in the EJ law for being an overburdened community. And these are the places in the census data that we use to make those calculations and define them. We had to derive those calculations. That information is just not available. I won't go into the details of this, but for those with your technical folks, this is where the information comes from. The different census tables, the different census fields that we use to make those calculations. Basically, this comes from the block group level data. It's called the 5-year American Community Survey data that was just recently published in December. So it's fairly recent data. It covers a period 2015 to 2019. So those are the fields and how the calculations that we did. We did those calculations at a couple of different levels. We did it at the census block group level, as well as for tribal areas. There's 2 tribal areas that we also did the same calculations for. Cruising to the top here, as I think Olivia said, under the law, within 120 days after the law was enacted, we were required to identify, notify municipalities if any one of those block groups were within the borders, and that's basically what we've done. So we use what's called the census data's county subdivision file to do that, and I'll get into a little bit of the details on that later, because that county subdivision file just matches up a little bit better at the block group level. It's to be more accurate in identifying facilities. Need to highlight, neither one of those data sets are actual legal boundaries. They are just statistical areas used by census data to generate data. So this is not any of these data that I'm showing are not really legal boundaries there. So that's kind of the background on how we did some of the calculations. And now I'll go show you 4 different places where you can get that data here on this website. The first one is over here far on the left, the list of overburdened communities. If you click the read more area, basically what that will do is it will download an Excel spreadsheet that you can find down here, and then you can just open that up, and that contains well, what I guess I would describe as kind of the letter and spirit of the law, literally a listing of each individual block group that meets those criteria. We did add this right now. This list is sorted by county and municipality, as well as then gives you the block group identifier for the individual block group. Then kind of going further across the spreadsheet, basically what I had outlined in the census tables as far as the specific fields and the calculations for each of the criteria, this is the data for them. So what I'm highlighting here, this is the percent low income data, the population used for it, how many, the population in each block group, below that 2 times poverty level, and then the calculation for the percent poverty. The next fields, the next columns do the same thing with minority, shows you where we're getting the data and the percent minority. Going further over, shows you the limited English proficiency. And so basically this spreadsheet, while not really user-friendly, provides all the data for each individual block group on if you want to go and see what data was in census that was brought together to make that calculation. A couple other things just to highlight real quick. I need to keep that active. Is a column here that basically we use this to show the which criteria are met by each one. So for example, this one meets the low income and minority and so forth. That's what we use to do the color coding on the map. These last ones just show whether the overburdened community is actually a block group or a tribal area. And then the final, there's just a handful of blocks. I think there's only a dozen of them that are actually split between towns. So you can kind of see that. So that's the first place where you can get data, probably the most detailed, providing all the data for each individual block group, sorted by county and by town. I will shift gears here, go to another source that we have, which is basically an interactive mapping tool. And you can access that tool by clicking that read more there, and it will pull up an interactive tool that's fairly simple to use. And I'll just show you a couple of things that you can do with it. First, you'll get a pop-up that says kind of what the data is used for, that it's used to identify overburdened communities under the the EJ law. Has some descriptive information about the law, and while we're doing a lot of things that Sean already went through. Whenever you pull up the map, there's I think 3 data layers. There's 3 layers that are pulled up. First, there are counties to kind of just at least give you the spatial awareness where you're at in New Jersey. The second is the overburdened communities themselves. And then the third is the municipalities that we've identified that have at least one block group under within their borders that have an overburdened communities. And these were the 331 towns that received a notification under that 120-day provision in the law. Some things that you can do if you're familiar with your GI, kind of these online GIS tools. You can type in an address, you can type in a town. I'm just going to type in here where I'm from, Bordentown, New Jersey, just to give you an idea. You can just type that in and it will zoom right to your town. You can put in an address or a town to get to a particular location. You can click on the overburdened community, and this is one, and basically the same information that's presented in the spreadsheet will automatically pop up. It will show you what of the overburdened community criteria are met for this particular block group. It's it meets the minority criteria, and then you can also see all the same data that was in that spreadsheet. You presented to you as far as the total population and how the individual criteria were calculated. Another thing to highlight here, some towns, there are 120 towns that also received a letter, and this is just because of a little bit of a misalignment of municipal boundaries. You can, and I'll just show you this by, you can open up the layers, and if you pull up the New Jersey municipal boundaries, I'll just zoom into it once, it would appear that just a small part of this block group is actually in Bordentown when it is not. It's actually in Bordentown Township over here. In GIS lingo, this is called a sliver. And it's due to a misalignment of the boundaries between the census data for county subdivisions that are New Jersey municipalities. Over time, we're working to correct those and get them in better alignment. We have folks here from the State Office of Information Technology that are working on that, if you have more detailed questions on that. But that's why some of you, there's 120 towns that received that letter. If you had pulled your town up and saw that, that's why you got it. That's really not kind of in your town. Another thing, whenever you do zoom in at this level, we do have the individual parcel data there. To pull up, specifically if you have questions on individual lots and blocks, you can pull that up as well, within this tool. So that's a real quick run through of that tool. Going to go back here. Another kind of the third way you can get this data. Essentially, the data that are in that tool, the overburdened communities themselves, the municipalities that were identified, are also being made available as a GIS download. So if you have your own, desktop system that you want to use, you can download it. You can download those layers here, whether in a file geodatabase or a shapefile or KML file. We're making that available. In addition, if you have your own ArcGIS online tools and you want to bring in these services, this shows you what the URLs for, so you can basically add the same information to any of your online tools or anything that you're using that way. So that's basically kind of the fourth way that we're providing it. Same information being served out in different ways, for you to use it in different ways. The fourth and probably kind of the simplest way to access the information for a town is we're providing individual PDF maps. Each of the 331 towns that were notified, we created PDF maps that are accessible here. So you can just click on that, and they're organized by county. So I'll just pull up the same one. So basically, Bordentown Township, kind of where I live, that same map that I zoomed into on the GIS tool is also available here. Just if you wanted just to get kind of a quick, the thumbnail of what's going on in a particular town, it's the information is here as well. And it's clipped right to your town, so you can kind of see exactly just what is available in that particular town. So that's a quick run through of the 4 different ways we're providing it. Another thing I'll just kind of highlight, we are putting together frequently asked questions. Right now, it pretty much goes over the same information that we've gone through here. And we're kind of continuously kind of updating this. So kind of look back to see how we're expanding this as we receive questions. We'll be expanding this and responding. So there's some information here. If you already have questions, there is an email list. So you can get on the list to receive updates there as well. So that's a real quick run through of the data tools that we have available. And at this point, I guess I will pass it back to Sean to see if we're getting, I don't know if we're getting questions or not. I can't see the talk right now, but I will stop sharing and see if we're getting questions, if you can kind of go back to that. And of course, I would be glad to answer any of the technical questions too. But if we have broader questions on the law or any of the technical information, we'd be glad to field them now.
Thank you, Steve. So folks, I hope that I hope what Steve demonstrated. A lot of work went into this municipal rollout. A lot of work went into this notification from our data folks and a lot of our technical folks to try to make this information as usable as possible. We really certainly believe that providing a spreadsheet with the list of your towns was not going to be sufficient for people to understand what this actually means. So we certainly put a lot of effort into trying to make it as user-friendly as possible. And if you haven't already, certainly encourage you to check out the website and check out those PDFs. And with that, any questions, Olivia, anything else that you wanted to add, please. It is all yours. And folks, raise your hands or type it in the chat if you have anything. And otherwise, we'll wish you a good rest of the day.
Question. Can you hear me?
We can hear
Yeah.
you. Can you tell us what your name is and where
Sure.
you're from?
Sure. My name is Bridget McMahon from the city of Hackensack. I'm the assistant zoning officer. I was asked to sit in this meeting. I apologize in the beginning. I was kind of distracted with something urgent here. I understand, a little bit about this, what's going on here, but what I don't understand is how it directly affects the municipalities. Are we bound to, with development coming in, that we have to refer them to this DEP new law? Is this part of our, I guess our engineer is going to have to make this part of his review letter as a resolution compliance item? Am I getting that the right way?
Yeah, so I think I think there's already a significant kind of overlap between municipal and department review for permits, right? Like, we already would do, land use permits and other permits for facilities that are seeking to be sited within your boundaries. So I think this is would be treated similarly. I think what is important to note is that this really does only apply to those very specific facilities we talked about at the beginning. And, we're going to disseminate the PowerPoint and all that, so you can refer back to what that actually means. But, we're talking about a specific subset of facilities that are, solid waste facilities, large sources of air pollution, major sources. So cogeneration facilities, things like that. It's not single family development. It's not multi-unit development. It's not those types of things. It's really about these other types of facilities that the legislature, drew lines around, saying that these were ones that created concerns within these overburdened communities because of pollution. So the breadth of what the department can ultimately do in permitting on these facilities can be fairly broad, but the scope of it in terms of what it actually applies to is not all that broad.
Okay. Yeah, so you're definitely going to share those materials with us.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, they'll all be on the website that Olivia referenced earlier, along with everything else we've done, and we continue to do. We'll just continue to update as we go along. But Carrie will make sure that everybody gets a copy of the PowerPoint that that we did kind of invited specifically to this thing, so you can kind of see that high level overview directly.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Next in the queue is Colleen McGrath. Colleen, can you tell us where you're from before you give your question or comment? And also unmute yourself. There you go.
I did. I don't know why it went back to mute. Sorry. Colleen from East Brunswick Township. So the majority of this sounds great. I understand most of it. I would just back to the major source of air pollution. So would that apply to transportation? We have some large warehouses in East Brunswick, so I would just be concerned about those. Okay,
so I think the kind of facility by facility thing, we're still working on what those definitions are going to specifically be. The legislation does have a specific definition of sources of major sources of air pollution. Those are Title V sources, so those are ones that emit specific pollutants over specific levels, and whether those warehouses would or would not, we'd have to look at kind of the specifics of that place. If they already exist, we would only be dealing with them if they are attempting to renew their existing air permits or expand. What this deals with more on the new facility side is if a new major source of air pollution is being cited, then it would have to go through the environmental justice analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Colleen. Next, we have Stephen Marks. Stephen, if you can tell us where you're from before you begin your remark.
Sure, the town of Kearney in Hudson County. So my question is, are state departments or state agencies exempt from the requirements of the law?
No, there's no specific exemption for any particular applicant. That doesn't apply that way. I think the universe of situations in which a state entity would be constructing one of these facilities is probably fairly narrow. But if they are constructing a facility that's covered by the law, they would be subject to its requirements when the rules go into effect.
So if the New Jersey Meadowlands Commission or the Sports and Exposition Authority is running a landfill within a overburdened community, would they, what requirements would that trigger or require, especially if it was in or adjacent to minority and low income and limited English proficient census tracts?
Sure. So if that specific landfill is an operating landfill and is seeking to renew or expand, then when those rules go into effect, we would look at the specifics of the landfill and how it might contribute to the stressors, and then that would be part of the environmental justice analysis. But I just caveat that with we're still early enough in the process where I don't have specifics of exactly how that would play out, but it would be subject to review.
Okay, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Any other hands? Any other folks want to ask a question? There we go.
Okay. Raina, before you give remarks, can you tell us where you're calling from?
Raina Salas, I'm from Borough of Hawthorne, Councilwoman. Sean, I just want to go back to that response to the permits. So if I have a facility in my town and they're going for renewal of permits, especially like a Title V, they will be subject to the EJ impact statement, correct? Because you made a remark that it's only for new and any expanding facilities. Just want to clarify.
No, new, expanded, or renewals. Yes, you are correct. That is true. The key there is, if the facility is covered and has a Title V permit, and it's seeking to renew that, yes, and we would do an analysis as part of the environmental justice rules on that facility's renewal application. But that is, again, if it's located in or in part in an overburdened community, which is that census block group. So you're looking specifically at the location. If it is in that block group, then it is subject to. It's not, I want to be clear, it's not, if you have an overburdened block group within your municipality, it does not mean that any application in the municipality is covered. It's just if it's in or if it's located in whole or in part in one of those overburdened communities.
Okay. And just following up with Steve Mark's Kearney example. So if the towns have their own recycling center or any composting or leaf site, the town is that permit. So those permits, there's a threshold of 100 tons, but if you're under 100 tons, you wouldn't be applicable, correct?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, if we're talking about recycling facilities, we're talking about how the legislation specifically defines recycling facilities. If it falls within the regulatory definition of recycling facility and is under that threshold, I think correct. I just want to make sure that all of these definitions are not yet written. So I don't want to say anything that ends up being untrue once we put all of these things into the regulations. But I think in this situation, we are talking about a legislative definition, and I think you are correct.
Okay, all right. Because I do, municipalities do have these facilities as well. So that was a really good question about the exceptions, if they are. So there are no. So if we're one of those municipalities or one of those categories of facilities, we would be applicable to the rule.
Well, I will say this, the legislation does not create any exceptions. when we are developing the specifics of the process, that is to be informed by our stakeholders. We will be engaging with everyone, including municipalities, about how we should define all of these things and whether there are appropriate exceptions anywhere. I'm just answering strictly on the way the legislation is written. It does not exempt any particular applicant.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Appreciate it.
No problem. I want to make sure I'm saying it right too. So.
Thank you. So I just want to note that next we will take Marcia, followed by Veronica. But after those two ladies speak, I just wanted to note for people who are on the phone and you're trying to figure out how to unmute, what you do is you press *6 to unmute. But first we're going to take Marcia, then we're going to take Veronica, and then if you're on the phone and you want to speak, that is the process to unmute. Okay, so Marcia, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. This is Marcia Caro in Middlesex Borough. Does this new legislation, will it categorize funding for legacy landfills owned by the municipality, give us some priority for getting some cleanup money at all?
It does not address that specific issue.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Veronica LaRae from Lacey Township. My question is, if those recycling centers and so on and so forth owned by the municipality, they have to fall within that zone, am I correct?
They would have to be located in whole or in part within an overburdened block group, correct?
Okay, so if it's not in there, I don't have to worry about it.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
There's one question from Daniel Block regarding when will the DEP regulations be coming out. Obviously, we're in the process of very extensive stakeholdering, and then we'll be engaging in an equally extensive writing process. But we would expect rules to be in a proposal stage sometime towards around the fall would be our target. All right. Shall we call it, Olivia?
I think that we can call it.
All right. Well, I will leave you the last word to you as always, but I'll just
I'm
say.
sorry.
Oh,
Do you know
yes.
when we would get the materials, the PowerPoint, or?
I would say I don't want to speak for Carrie, but I would imagine as soon as we can attach it to an email and send it to everyone who was invited here today.
Thank you.
Do that, or we can send it on Friday and our weekly update to all the municipalities.
There you go.
Thank you.
Quickly. We will get it to you quickly.
Yes.
Thank you, Carrie. And Olivia, all yours. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us for this presentation. Just as a reminder, in addition to Carrie providing that information to you in her weekly notification to you, you may also send us emails with questions at ejrulemaking@dep.nj.gov. And if you have any other questions about the law, if you want to access the text of the law itself, or any of those previous sessions, please do not hesitate to reach our website as well. Both of those things were dropped in the chat very early on. And so with that, we will be available to you, and we look forward to hearing from you with any follow-up questions or concerns. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.